man built his house upon the rock.
All right, here we go. Welcome. Here we are in the
Black Family Recording Studios.
No. We're not going to say. We're just gonna it's a secret recording studio.
Location?
Yeah, an
Secret
undisclosed location.
Oh, I gave that away. Dang it.
We are in the basement of a abandoned warehouse.
Yeah, we are all blindfolded and taken down here. We don't know where we are.
That's not true. We're sitting by a fire.
Yeah,
there is a fire.
I don't feel comfortable with the
We're
lying.
actually in the storage room, and there's a fire inside the storage
Don't
room
tell
right
Eric.
now.
Don't tell Eric. However, if you do hear Steve and Kevin barking, that may give it away.
They're in the storage room, too.
They're also in the storage room. We had to move from our recording studios because they are starting putting up new lights and new electrical work is happening and everything is moving. So that's why. So here we are. I'm joined by John, Jon. Is it Jonathan?
It is Jonathan. Yeah.
Okay. File, elder candidate by Kirsten Black, my wife, and by Betty Horiuchi, on staff over all people, young and old.
Yep.
Okay. Anyway, and our hope is with this podcast to look back at the text from the Sunday previous and to hopefully get into some application and talking through some of the text in a way that gives us a greater insight, greater love for who God is. Eric is away with his family in the beautiful nation of Texas. Only one of those things is true. He's in the nation of Texas. So anyway, that's what's happening. Let me give a recap. Oh, no, we're not going to do I almost skipped the question.
Gosh,
Jumped
Ben.
over.
I got so excited about the recap and the actual thing we're here for that I
Clearly,
forgot.
yeah, this is clearly the only reason people listen.
All right, here is our starting question. Because it's the week of Thanksgiving, the question is, it's a two-part question. And it's a two-part question that will have an answer, unlike Eric's questions that don't really have answers. The question is, do you like Thanksgiving food? And if you like Thanksgiving food, what is it? Or Betty, an alternate question could be, what is your favorite Thanksgiving memory?
How about a favorite Thanksgiving food that involves a memory? Ooh. Make it complicated.
Ooh.
Or what's a favorite Thanksgiving food you remember eating?
Ooh.
Oh, my goodness.
How about we just dialogue about different questions and not actually? I don't have a favorite Thanksgiving food because I don't really get very excited about Thanksgiving food. I'm kind of like, I don't really like mashed potatoes.
Is that a traditional Thanksgiving food?
Yeah. You don't know that?
I feel like
Mashed
everyone
potato?
you would ask would
Turkey,
probably
mashed
say yes.
potatoes.
Would say mashed potatoes.
That's
All right.
top 3 for sure.
Yeah.
I would say.
It shows you how often I just don't love Thanksgiving food. There's really nothing that I get excited about. I'm like, yeah, it's all fine, but I would choose something different every time. But favorite memory, not favorite, one memory that stands out in our family is one year there had just been some breakdown in relationships early on in church planting. And so kind of what we had done normally with Thanksgiving was with a big group of families, and that was not going to happen. So, and Vince and I were in a place emotionally that we didn't have the bandwidth to do a whole lot. So we decided to tell our boys that we were going to do a Charlie Brown Thanksgiving. And if you've ever watched the Thanksgiving Charlie Brown movie, they have pretzel sticks, jelly beans, toast, and popcorn. And so that's what we had for Thanksgiving. And our boys still look back at that and say it was maybe one of their favorite Thanksgivings ever. So maybe they're not big Thanksgiving food people either.
Not maybe. They are not. That was both. You did a memory and food.
I
Good job.
excelled. I excelled.
You answered the question.
Extra credit.
Eric will be proud or
Extra
disappointed.
credit. So my family, the File family, growing up, we would do the full-on Thanksgiving meal twice a year, Thanksgiving Day and Christmas Day. So we loved it. It was always there was great anticipation for the turkey, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, all that. And we only had it twice a year, but we loved it. So yeah, it's a huge expectation, huge anticipation for me to have Thanksgiving.
I'm going back to, because you said it's top 3.
Mashed potatoes? Did I not say mashed potatoes?
No, you did.
Oh, okay.
But turkey, I would say, that's a top 3.
Mashed potatoes and gravy. That's what
Stuffing,
people-
you said stuffing, that's a top 3.
Mm-hmm.
Cranberry something?
Cranberry
No?
is auxiliary, I would
I
say.
Are we just
feel like-
saying Thanksgiving foods in general right
No,
now?
mashed
but he
potatoes,
said mashed potatoes was
gravy,
top 3.
and
Yes.
turkey. I mean,
If-
a lot of
if
people
you
do
had-
green bean casserole.
Mashed potatoes.
Kirsten just vomited
That's
a little.
not on my top. No, that's
No.
not on my.
It's
Sweet
not,
potato casserole would be that could vie for a top 3 spot. In
Do
my
you do
book.
like the marshmallows on
No,
top, or like
no,
a praline?
the little nuts and stuff?
No.
The
Oh,
praline.
yeah.
Yeah, the
That's
praline.
good.
The praline does help. Yeah, but not the marshmallows.
Yeah.
I know what the 3 most hated Thanksgiving foods are.
All right. I think
Candied yams.
I think they're the top 3 that John was talking
I
about.
honestly, there's some overlap. Candied yams, green bean casserole, and cranberry sauce.
Yeah,
The
I don't-
canned one or the like
I don't
real?
know.
I
The
actually
quick
like.
Google search didn't tell me.
I like cranberry sauce, but you have to make it from scratch.
I agree. I actually really like
Not the
it.
can where you go and it pops out of the can at like dog
Has
food.
little ringlets
Yeah.
around the edge.
No, you have to cut on those rings so people don't know. What's your answer, Betty? You were going with a different question
Can
altogether.
I answer both?
Sure.
Well, my favorite Thanksgiving food, probably rolls. Which, fun fact, that's also Austin Boone's favorite, which was in our youth leader trivia last night.
Like just white bread rolls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like homemade, or
I don't
like
mean just. I didn't mean to downplay that. I just meant that's what simply
Yeah.
you're talking about. All right.
So it's not technically a Thanksgiving food. I mean, you can eat rolls
I
throughout the
mean,
year.
Anything can be a Thanksgiving food if you eat it on Thanksgiving.
If you're thankful for it.
If you're thankful.
If you
Yeah.
give thanks.
Pizza.
My favorite, well, we used to have sushi growing up all the time when my grandparents would come down. My favorite memory, this actually might not even be Thanksgiving, but it might have been.
So now you're just telling us memories you've had.
Well, it's just confusing because family would come for New Year's and Thanksgiving, so I just don't remember which holiday it was, but I'll pretend it's Thanksgiving because
If
or else
it's
I don't
the-
have
if
a
it's the
favorite
answer,
memory.
Yeah.
One time my grandma brought these like chocolates, like the assorted chocolate things in like a tub, and my cousin and I went through and ate every single flavor to like compare and test and sample them, and I felt so unwell at the end of the night because there's just a high quantity of chocolate. So that had nothing to do with Thanksgiving itself, but we just ate chocolates that my grandma brought.
I'm going to guess it wasn't even during Thanksgiving.
It honestly probably wasn't.
I think that was Valentine's Day.
Yeah, that's right.
How about you, Vince?
I don't have any.
That's not fair, Eric.
I mean, that was your answer. I don't really. I'm not a big Thanksgiving food fan. I feel like it. Sorry, John. I feel like I'm getting.
I'm not offended.
I'm being judged by John.
As long as you are not preventing me from having Thanksgiving,
Okay.
I'm not bothered by that.
I feel,
No.
from my opinion, it's just mine. My opinion is that all of the Thanksgiving foods are mediocre, but they're all obligatory, and everyone assumes that we must have them.
What about rolls?
They're fine, but I wouldn't say that's Thanksgiving.
How about a bussin' cheesecake that I
Yeah,
would
but
make?
I could have that anytime.
Yeah, we had one last night.
Yeah,
so
we had
Okay.
that. Yeah,
But you were thankful, so that's
yeah.
good.
we did give thanks.
We did give thanks. We had with our township last night. We had an Italian Thanksgiving. So Kirsten made homemade pasta, all the noodles, and it was amazing. So we had a great time, and it had nothing to do with all of the foods that John loves.
I don't know. I feel like I sort of answered 3 questions, but didn't actually. What was the original question?
Do you like Thanksgiving food? Yes or no?
I said yes, yes.
Okay. And what is your favorite Thanksgiving?
Okay, I see. I didn't get to answer that explicitly. I would say sweet potato casserole, but the version of it that I really love that's we can't reproduce now. We were our family. We were missionaries in Japan for 14 years, and one great street food in Japan is called yakimo, where
Whack-a-mole? Is that what you said?
yakimo, which means grilled sweet potatoes. And they in the wintertime, these guys would ride around in these little carts with hot coals, and they would be grilling these sweet potatoes in foil. They'd play a little song, and you'd hear them and come down and buy it off of them, hot and fresh. And we would go down and buy a pile of these, like clear the guy out, take it upstairs. Sarah would make it into sweet potato casserole, which was top notch. Yeah.
All right.
So whack-a-mole casserole
So
is
if
his
I can
favorite.
bring you some whack-a-mole on Thursday, you will.
Yaki means grilled. So a lot of Japanese foods, you have okonomiyaki, yakitori, yakiniku.
We're just going with whack-a-mole.
Yeah, well, I
All
like
right,
whack-a-mole
Vince, you want to
better.
give us a recap?
We are 11 minutes in.
We're 11. Eric is not thrilled right now. All right, here's the recap. Here's the recap from the passage we looked at yesterday, 21 through 27. Jesus, we're finishing up the Sermon on the Mount. We only have 1 week left. Jesus begins by saying, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Continues to go from there and say, some will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name? And to that he responds, I never knew you. And then he gives an illustration which has been helpful throughout the Sermon on the Mount. And he talks about the two builders of these two houses that are built on different foundations. One foundation is on the rock. The other foundation is on sand. And the thing that distinguishes the two different builders and the houses that are built on these different foundations are the one who builds on a rock-solid foundation is a wise man who does the words of Jesus. So hears the words of Jesus and does them. And the one on the sandy foundation is the one who hears the words but does not do them. He's a foolish person. So that's the warning passage from Jesus, the text that we looked at yesterday, Sunday. So some questions. And this is... I think we all talked about this before we started recording. This is not an easy passage. It can bring up some fear. It can bring up some doubt. It can bring up some real questions about what are we looking at here here? Are we looking for works, or is this just about obedience? So it can bring about a bunch of these questions for us as we consider this text. And so I want to just talk. I've got some questions written down, but I'm hoping that we can just have some dialogue around some of these things as we think about it. So first question I'll have is this on those first verses. Just ask, have you had times where because of some spiritual experience you believe you're on the right track, or because of some this is what God wants, I'm doing the right thing, I've experienced some what looks like fruit here, so I must be on the right track. Where I'm going with that is Jesus says, some will say, Lord, Lord, look at all these things we've done in your name. Doesn't that get us somewhere? So if you had experiences like that where you thought, yep, I'm on the right track because of some spiritual experience.
I grew up in a Christian family, and my dad was a pastor, and I was a good kid. I followed the rules. And so I remember praying the sinner's prayer at a very young age. But I think most of the things that I based my faith on were not actually Jesus. And so I think looking back, what I realize is that I was good. I was a good person, but I was not holy. And so I think that I don't actually know when I became a believer, but I assumed that I was saved on a lot of outside things that didn't actually matter. That I grew up in a good Christian family, and that I followed the rules, and I was obedient as far as I was able to be obedient. And I thought that I didn't sin as much as other people and didn't struggle with sin. And so it was really a salvation completely based on my own goodness rather than God's righteousness.
So you use the word obedience there. You were obedient. which is what Jesus says that he's looking for. It's not just about those who profess or confess Jesus as Lord, but it's the one who does the will of my Father. Was there a difference there that you see?
My obedience was what made me look good. My obedience was what my righteousness was based on. And so I think I was obedient outwardly, but inwardly it was all about me. It was about earning the approval of people. And like I said, I think I was good, but I wasn't holy. Like I didn't long for the things of God. I longed for the approval of people. And I learned early on that being good and following the rules and being obedient was what got me approval from my family, from youth leaders, from teachers. And so it was about me, not about really desiring the things of God.
Yeah.
A different angle here of perhaps following a pathway that seemed like this is what God wants. I can think of multiple examples, even with my wife Sarah's health. And she has struggled with high levels of pain, particularly from fibromyalgia and some other things. But we have chased down treatment leads. It sometimes felt like this is too good to be true. This has got to be God. Like we'd be at a conference and we just happened to meet a person who had just been to a place, who knew a guy who did this thing that really made a life-changing or impact on this person's health. And to sort of think, wow, well, this must be God because it's so, quote unquote, coincidental or something. And so it almost felt like we were expressing faith by tracking down a random lead, buying tickets to fly to Florida to see this guy and pay out of pocket for something. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't follow interesting leads, but I'm saying there was this sense that it almost felt like we were doing a spiritual thing. We were showing faith and putting, our money where our faith was by following this lead, and it didn't pan out at all. And yet somehow were we self-deceived in thinking we were chasing a good story. We wanted someday to say, can you believe God and made this happen? And we were chasing what ultimately wasn't Jesus. We were chasing a story, or we were chasing a false hope.
Yeah.
I think my answer that came to mind is not too different from Kirsten's. And just thinking about growing up, a lot of my motivation to do anything was, one, to elevate myself, but two, out of deep fear of breaking the rules and like the consequences that come with it, and just the ways that others would see me in a lower way if I did so. But I think that's just like what my faith also looked like to me, was just based on obedience. And I remember like junior, senior year in high school, there was some speaker that we went and saw that for a public school was like oddly very Christian. But I just remember listening to it, and at the end, I don't even remember what like the take home message was, but I just remember sitting there like heartbroken and like convicted, because I was like, I'm not being nice enough to people, so therefore I'm not being a good Christian. And like what Jesus wants from me is to be better than I am. And all of that like sadness and frustration with myself in it was not because my heart was in the wrong place, but because I was just living in a way that didn't look perfect, so therefore others would see me in a poor light. So yeah, not very different from Kirsten, just thinking my obedience was mainly for myself. And in my mind, though, I thought that's what was saving me. And that's how God was viewing me, was based on that.
Let's go down that road, because I'm sure we've all experienced some of that before, where we do obey. We have a desire to obey. The motive may be wrong for our obedience. We may be obeying out of some desire to look good, or because we feel like we have to. Does a passage like this bring about fear or doubt? Does it bring about, as you read through this, you think, oh, I thought I was on the right track, but maybe I wasn't? Is there a fear that comes along with it? How do you combat that if that's the case?
I think for a lot of years, passages like this did bring a lot of fear to me. And I was one of those kids that I don't ever remember not being a Christian or trying to at least follow what I thought Christianity was. And yet there were years and years and years where anytime the gospel message was shared and the pastor would pray, I would pray just in case it didn't stick. I would constantly be like questioning whether or not I was saved and wrestling with that. And so I think passages like this are a good warning. They're a warning for us to check our hearts. It's a warning for us to really consider what's our motivation, what's the thing that's driving us, what's the thing we're placing our faith in. But at the same time, I think if it's something that brings us to fear, we have to really consider that oftentimes I think fear is a tool the enemy uses to try to discourage us. And so as we were talking through this, I thought of 2 Timothy 1:7, for God gave us a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. And so if there's something in our life, especially in our faith, that is motivating us out of fear, I think getting to a deeper understanding of what's the motivation there. And if I'm feeling afraid, is it a godly fear? Is it, a godly fear of, okay, this is a conviction from the Spirit and I need to really consider what the Spirit's trying to lead me in right here? Or is this a tool of the enemy that he's trying to use to discourage me and to make me feel afraid? And so trying to wrestle between those two distinctions can be helpful, I think.
I can remember reading this specific passage, like maybe early college or late high school, and seeing like what it says, like not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And like going on, it says like that many will say, like they prophesied in his name and casted out demons. And I just remember reading that and being like, if those people aren't going to enter the kingdom of heaven, what in the world is going to happen to me? And just being so afraid of that, but then not knowing how to come to a better understanding. So just kind of like moving on and like, oh, I'll think about this later. But by God's grace, in growing in maturity and understanding, I think what Kirsten was saying, like this is a warning, and I think it's good to stop and evaluate my heart, but it doesn't bring about that same fear that I can remember happening a long time, not that long ago. Honestly, high school and early college was not that long ago.
Years and years ago.
Many seconds ago.
I think one thing that was helpful that Vince, you reiterated, or you've been reminding us throughout the Sermon on the Mount, is the original audience. Yeah. So Jesus is speaking to his gathered disciples, and you reminded us this week that this is even before the 12 were explicitly delineated, but you have believers, and then by the end of the sermon, I think the last line, it talks about, more people had gathered around, but seeing in different places in Scripture warnings, and I think warnings when you sort of read them face value, they seem sort of black and white, like, oh no, it can be fear-inducing. But if we're looking at what's the motive of the speaker, and that a lot of times we do this in writing or in techniques of oral communication, of you present something in a way that evokes a response. And so is Jesus here speaking in a way that evokes a response, especially from believers? And there are countless verses that we could go to that provide assurance for believers of confidence and hope, that it's not our obedience itself that gives us any merit before God. It's what Jesus has done for us on the cross. So those things help give us context, but to say Jesus is spurring believers on towards obedience, and I think that's an appropriate encouragement to us to look to our lives, but then to have the response not be fear, but to be encouragement.
Well, I think it's interesting the placement of this part of the sermon because we spent the last 10 weeks or so talking through all the ways that we fall short and all the ways that Jesus alone has fulfilled all these commandments, And so we started out with in Matthew 5 the Beatitudes, and then how Christ came to fulfill the law, and then dealing with anger and lust and divorce and oaths and retaliation and on. And we've talked over and over and over again how we just can't obey perfectly, and how short we fall in all of this. And so it's interesting that this passage comes near the end of all of that, because I think it's learning to balance truth with grace, and grace with ourselves, and understanding we're never going to obey these things perfectly. We're not even going to be close to perfect in obeying. And so knowing that our love for the Lord should change our motives and should change our actions, but even with that change, we're still going to fail.
I don't want to jump questions here, but the thought just struck me as you're talking about this is the end of a long, extensive sermon that challenges us on so many levels. And in some ways, the final comment is build your house on the rock. There's going to be so many things that I feel like, Vince, you mentioned this maybe early on, that nothing convicts us of sin more than the Sermon on the Mount. There's so many, section after section is pointing out how we are falling short and seeing our sin. And yet, what's the hope in all this is that we have a rock that is not ourselves. We are based on eternal, transcendent truth of Jesus. And so that is our hope in the midst of struggling with sin, seeking to live a life of obedience.
Yeah. So if the passage like this at times can drive us to fear, hopefully in our maturity that's growing, we understand that Christ, because of Christ, our eternity is secure. If not fear, what should it move us toward?
I think it should move us towards self-examination, and asking the Spirit to reveal areas in our lives that we may be believing wrongly, that we may have placed a false hope, like you said earlier, John, and then repentance, and then from there, just gratitude and praise that we are saved and we are secure, and there's nothing that we can do that will cause us to lose that salvation.
Yeah.
That firm foundation, though, the passage speaks to, we can have a false assurance, or we can stand on something that appears to be firm, but that erodes when the rains come. And so, Vince, you brought that up, that cultural context of the Sea of Galilee. So there is a rock that is an eternal security for us, but we can, and Kirsten pointing to self-examination, let's shift those feet. Let's see what are we really standing on right now.
Yeah, that's good, John. You're antsy to get to that, to the foundations, aren't you? You're antsy to get to the story. You like stories and pictures, and
I do.
Yeah, let's shift that to that then. Jesus moves, and this is, while it is a picture and it's something we can visualize, he's even more explicit, I think. He says, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them. So he moves toward obedience. It's the outcome of this is obedience. And he gives the picture of it is like a man who builds his house on the rock. And then 26, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who builds his house on the sand. So these two foundations that stand out there. I want to get, if you all are okay with it, get somewhat personal, get into our lives a little bit. Jesus talks about the rains and the floods and the winds that crash into these houses, identical houses built on different foundations. What have been some of those rains and winds and floods that have crashed in around your lives? Do you have things that come to mind?
We've talked about it here on the podcast, but I think the first huge storm for me was anxiety, and not understanding where that was coming from, or in my mind, what I had done wrong, why God was allowing that for me. And so I think that was the first one that chipped away a lot at my understanding of who God was or who he wasn't, and who I had built him to be in my mind. Probably the next one that really stands out is when Solomon got sick, 6 months after we moved to Fort Collins and we're planting a church, and he started having seizures, and we didn't know for 2 years if he was going to survive. And then obviously our most recent storm of just losing Ezra to cancer. Those are significant points that have all been just storms.
Yeah. What else? I want to hear, if you all are willing, I'd love to hear about some of those, because the follow-up question that's coming. But any other storms that have hit? Rains, floods?
Rains that exposed a shaky foundation, you mean?
I'm not going to go there yet, John. Don't push into the picture yet. I'm just asking you.
Just your storms.
Yeah, what has come into your life that you feel is a storm and rain? You're not leading this, John. I'm leading this. We'll get there. We're putting the ball on the tee for us to get there.
I trust you, Vince. Thank you. So I alluded to it a little bit earlier about my wife, Sarah. We served overseas for a number of years in Japan, working with the Japanese pastor, seeing a church being planted by God's grace. And those early years were just so much busyness and activity. And Sarah hosted so many things in our apartment, and we were just doing stuff, meeting people, gathering people, seeking to sort of slowly, step by step, moving towards spiritual conversations and such. But there was a real busyness to every day. And then after about 7 or so years in Tokyo, in that context, Sarah really started to develop strong symptoms, really dealing with pain, and that limited our ability to do a lot of things. And Sarah had been active in leading this amazing women's Bible study where we saw several ladies come to faith. And it got to the point where Sarah was in so much pain that she couldn't commit to lead that Bible study anymore. That was, one of the greatest treasures she had was spending time with these ladies, believers and non-believers, and she had to give that up. Sarah was in bed with pain. I'm needing to stay home a lot more to help with the kids and different things. And I want to finish the story, but I feel like I should pause there.
No.
Well, just wrestling with, are we being productive? Are we really doing what God called us here to do? Because we're supposed to do stuff so people can meet Jesus. And I think that was the physical pain and the change to our family rhythms and dynamics, and then struggling with our identity and are we being valuable assets to the church. And so much of that was rooted not in our identity in Jesus, it was kind of our identity in being productive.
Yeah. So you went to the foundation, even though I told you not to. That's good,
well,
John.
I thought I paused and asked.
No, that's good. No, but let's go there, because you had that storm. The rains came in. The flooding was there. The winds were crashing in, and it began to expose a little bit of the foundation.
Right. There's a theology that if you asked me, I would have said was purely based on Jesus' work alone on the cross for us. And yet functionally, I realized, at least for me, that it was so disillusioning, disappointing that we weren't able to be as active and as quote unquote productive.
Yeah.
So,
I'm putting you on the spot. Maybe you haven't thought about it in these words. Can you look back at that and say, this was the foundation? Like, can you name it? Again, I know I'm putting you on.
Functionally.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose you and Kirsten and Betty and others could resonate there. In a full-time ministry position, there can be an allure towards being able to quote unquote sort of prove yourself.
Okay. So the foundation, would you say, was the foundation was? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. You. I mean, it was you and what you could accomplish.
In a sense,
yeah.
I would never have said those words, but
Sure.
I think that it's fair. When I looked at how discouraged I was when we weren't being as involved.
Yeah.
I think it's really easy in almost everything in life for us to make just tiny, tiny little shifts in the way that we view things, and to go in, like in ministry, to go from serving the caller, serving the Lord who called us, to then the calling. And so I think that, and those are tiny shifts, but they're deadly, because in one sense we're feeling called and we're going to serve the Lord, and then all of a sudden the calling that we feel on our lives becomes the thing that we're serving rather than God. And so I think in these situations, it was the same, probably faulty foundation when we moved here to plant the church, and then Solomon got sick, and I wasn't really able to be involved, and Vince was hardly involved in planting the church. Vince preached every week, and that was it. He wasn't able to network. He wasn't able to meet with people. He wasn't really able to lead a whole lot because of the circumstances around Solomon's sickness. We were really kind of just tapped out for a while. And looking back, we can see that it was the Lord who built the church. It was not us doing the work. It was God who brought people, and it was God who did everything. So he really almost plucked us out of the picture for a season. And I don't know that I realized at the time, but I probably had a sense of like, I needed to be useful. I needed to be faithful to the calling, and the calling became the thing that I was serving rather than God. And it's so intertwined. It's easy to say, it's a black and white. It was this and not this. But I think like with our feet, often we're standing, 85% on solid ground, but our toes are kind of dipped into the sand, and enough so that we kind of start to lose our balance. And it doesn't mean that we're not trying to be faithful, and it doesn't mean that we're necessarily the ones that say, Lord, Lord, and he says, I never knew you. But I think when the storms come, it exposes the areas that are not firm footing.
Yeah, I think, did you have something, Betty?
Like for the question?
No, I just saw you raise your mic.
Oh.
I don't want to cut you off.
No.
Okay.
Nope, go ahead.
I think there are times when we don't recognize, maybe a couple things. One, where we don't even recognize there is a storm because we're just head down, got to get through this. So we don't recognize that it's a storm. It's just what we've learned to live with and endure. So there's that. I think there are also times when we don't realize that we have gone through a storm, but on the other side, we look back and say that was a storm. And I don't know that we recognize in the middle of building, the foundation that's secure is he says, hears these words of mine and does them. So a foundation that's secure is hearing the teaching of Jesus and doing it. I don't know that in the middle of it, we actually know that we're building a foundation. Does that make sense? So we can hear the words of Jesus and understand his teaching and really resonate with his teaching and even turn in obedience to his teaching. But I don't, at least for me, I don't know that I've ever consciously thought, and the reason I'm doing this is so that I can build a firm foundation. Yet, on the other side of a storm, I look back and see, by God's grace, he walked me through that storm because of the firm foundation I, by his grace again, was building along the way. Does that make sense? what I just said.
And I think the fact that when we come through a storm and our faith has matured and our belief has deepened is evidence of the fact that God walked us through that storm. Because you hear all the time of people that are confronted with storms and they walk away.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, Vince and I have a friend from years ago when he was in seminary who was in seminary. He and his wife were some of our closest friends. And he was training to be a pastor and ended up having an affair, divorcing his wife, and completely walking away from faith. And there were some storms that came in those seasons, and it exposed his foundation, and he has since turned away from the Lord. And so I think that when we do face storms and our faith remains intact, it's evidence of the fact that God is holding us, and that our faith is sincere.
I just have an answer to the storm question.
We're back. Okay. Favorite Thanksgiving food. Good. Go.
Favorite memory.
Yeah. The storm
Am I
question.
also talking about the foundation
Go for
thing
it.
too?
Yeah.
Okay.
John moved us ahead into the pictures.
Yeah, you can step back,
Yeah.
please.
Okay, great. And then I'll step forward again. Well, two things that come to mind that I'm thinking of are honestly right now. I feel like stepping out of college and into, I don't know, real adulthood.
Real life.
It's been hard and confusing, and I feel like it feels very easy to try to grasp on to the things that were behind me and not really want to face the reality that things are changing right now. And I feel like it's just kind of led to a lot of confusion in my own life and what I'm doing and what I desire for the future and all of these questions. And so I just feel like right now has been one of those seasons where it is difficult, and I feel like it would be easy to just kind of give up and think, there's no purpose now because I'm not a student and that's how I was defined for so long. And yeah, but then recognizing that there is something greater. But that wasn't really the main answer I was going to give. I was also thinking about my sophomore year. I feel like consistently throughout college, the spring semesters, I really struggled a lot with my mental health. And my sophomore year, I feel like was probably the hardest spring of all of college. I mean, that was when things were relatively shut down. I was living in Fort Collins at the time, and living in a house where there were really great aspects to it, but then there were also really horrible aspects to it. And I just wasn't doing well. And I think I remember in thinking of exposing the foundation, being frustrated because that was my first year as a leader in NAVS. And I was I'm doing well in leadership. Why is this happening? I made a really tough decision to lead a Bible study and I knew it was mature. So why did me making that choice and choosing the better option lead to this? And I think there were just a lot of things happening within that semester. And I was just thinking it wasn't fair because of what I was doing and because I was trying to build the foundation upon myself and how I was living as a leader and just even active participant in NAVS. And my life was revolving around how I was existing within that ministry rather than building it upon who the ministry was about.
Yeah.
I think it's important to acknowledge that not all storms come for the intent of exposing foundation. I think it's easy for us to think that every hardship that we face is God just bringing a storm to expose some sort of faulty foundation. And I don't think that's true. I think, though, that we can trust that, God does indeed work all things together for good. And so if we learn through the process of the storm that we're facing that there is a faulty foundation, that's a mercy from God. But I also think we need to recognize that there are storms that come simply because we live in a broken and a fallen world. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that God's trying to expose something in our hearts. And so, I think for a lot of years, I lived in such a way, I lived with the belief that the hard things that came were always God's way of trying to expose to me something I wasn't doing well enough, or I wasn't believing rightly, or it almost always felt like it was discipline or punitive. And having to realize that sometimes it's just the fact that we live in a world that's wrecked by sin, and we're going to face hardship and suffering that we don't understand. And it's not because God's trying to expose a faulty foundation, but it's simply because of the fact that we're sinful creatures living in a sinful world.
Yeah, I hear you. So it's not necessarily that God is trying to expose something. However, I do think that in those times, because we live in a fallen world, we live in a world that's broken, the reality of the foundation on which we stand is clear. And I think we see that. I think one of the tricks of the enemy is to get us to believe, we talked about this, somebody talked about it earlier, this black and white thinking. One of the tricks of the enemy, I think, is to get us to believe it is black and white. It's only obedience, and obedience has its own hang-ups, or it's only disobedience, and it has its own hang-ups. But Betty, you were talking about this earlier before we started this, like this apathy. I think there's a place where it's not necessarily disobedience, a blatant, I'm going to go off and disobey in this way. At the same time, it's not necessarily obedience. Like, this is full, straightforward obedience. It's just this, I don't care, a sort of apathy. And I think that's a trick of the enemy to get us to just settle in and not really care about a foundation being built, or whether or not we're standing on something shaky or not. Have you all experienced that?
Yes, I was thinking about that with the example I just shared from sophomore year. I feel like sitting in the midst of it, that's how I felt, was just kind of a lack of caring about pushing forward and really wanting to give up on things that I was already committed to, or like a program I was supposed to go to over the summer, which I knew was going to like push me and challenge me spiritually. And I remember driving up to that program and calling my brother and crying when I was 20 minutes away, because I was like, this isn't what I want to do. Like, this isn't going to help me. And I just feel like struggling within that season just resulted in a lot of apathy and just kind of going through the motions of the things that I was currently committed to without really a desire to be there.
I want to close this in. I think we're probably getting short on time. I want to move quickly toward Jesus calls this warning is for us to be checking our hearts to see if we're just hearers of the word, or if we're also doers of the word. I'm trying to get the question in my head to formulate as I'm speaking, but how do we navigate that of, are we hearing the word being taught, translating it from just hearing and knowing to actually then being obedient to it, which is what Jesus is calling us to? How do we navigate between this obedience that he's calling us to, but also a reliance on him and not our obedience?
That's tricky. It's hard. It's really hard. And I think that we have to embrace the fact that we will fail a lot, and we will not do things well, and we'll wrestle with what that will look like, and then resting in his kindness and his grace with us. As you were talking, I was just thinking about seasons in my life where I have put up what I thought were boundaries. And in hindsight, I realized they were walls to keep people out because I had been hurt. And so boundaries are really healthy, and boundaries are acceptable things and good, and they're a reflection of some mental and emotional health when you're able to put up boundaries. But I, for a lot of seasons, put up walls to keep people out, keep people at arm's length. And I don't know if I realized it at the time what I was doing. I think I was deceiving myself. And then the Lord just began to expose that to me and began to show me, hey, Kirsten, this is more about your control than it is about loving me. And these are not boundaries. These are walls. These are things that you're putting up in order to protect yourself rather than to really serve. And so I think there's times that we do things wrongly, and yet again, God in his kindness shows us that. And so with several of those relationships, I had to move forward and just go, confess to people, I'm sorry I pushed you out because I was hurt and I was scared and I was trying to control things. And so I think it's understanding that we're going to do things poorly at times, and then when the Spirit convicts us, taking time to repent and then change as much as we're able in a way that's pleasing to God. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to mess up again, and it's not that I'm going to always be healthy with boundaries that I put in place. It doesn't mean I'm not going to be selfish with my relationships, but I think it's doing as well as you know to do according to what God would have you do. And when you fail, owning that, confessing it, repenting, and then trying to do better.
Yeah. You mentioned the word, the Spirit is at work there. And I think it's not a part of this passage, not to say that Jesus did not have that in mind, but we have the Spirit. And so as we consider not just being hearers of the word, but also doers, the role of the Spirit it has to be primary as we think about this. The Spirit brings conviction. The Spirit's the one who, in your example, Kirsten, the Spirit's the one that brought to light some of the ways that you could be changing. The Spirit, I think, redirects, Betty, from what you said in your sophomore year and how that played out, and going to this summer opportunity or not. Like, the Spirit's at work there in your heart, in your life. John, certainly the Spirit is bringing conviction to you and encouragement to you as you're thinking through, in the midst of your role in Japan and how that's going to work out and how to care for your family. The Spirit's at work there. The Spirit's at work in us to show us obedience and what is disobedient, and not just show us that, but also then encourage us toward and help us toward what is truly obedient as the storms come in. And as the rains beat down, we have the Spirit at work in us. And so I think we have to remember that. We have to keep that in mind as we consider our obedience. Obedience is what Jesus is calling us to. Our salvation, our identity with God the Father is not held secure in our obedience. Our obedience is the overflow of someone who has been changed because of what the Spirit is doing. And so, like you said, Kirsten, it's hard. It's hard to keep all of that together as we walk the Christian life and as the storms come and as things press in. But we have the Spirit to be walking with us. I'm going to finish with our final question, just to please Eric, very quickly.
It is a good question.
It is a good question. I don't mean to throw Eric under the bus when he's not here. Eric, we all love you, and we're thankful for your question. It is a liturgy of sorts. It is a something we're ready for and we know is coming. So the question is, how does this passage raise our affections for our good God?
So thinking about the topic of obedience, which can seem like a potentially harsh or judgmental or difficult topic, but growing in our affections for Jesus and kind of flipping the story. I was talking to my younger kids Sunday night. We were talking about communion and what that really means, and kind of the recognition that we are remembering what has already been done for us. It is easy to think about what we do for God, but celebrating communion reminds us what God has done. So when we head into the week, we are heading into the week recognizing that our sin has been paid for, that Christ's righteousness already accomplished is ours as we are united with Him in faith, and we come before the Father with robes of white. We are declared righteous before God. That's a bunch of theological phrases, but the idea that we're heading into the week and obedience isn't seeking to achieve what God needs. It's a response of thankfulness. So even that little conversation with the kids about communion, it's we step into the week obeying a God who loves us already, rather than trying to make God love us.
That's good. Kirsten?
As John was talking, I think the verse that came to mind, I was trying to find it, but I'm not finding it right now, is when Jesus says, "Come to me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And I think when we're trying to obey on our own, it feels heavy and it feels burdensome and it feels like a weighty task. And yet when we're obeying by the power of the Spirit, it doesn't feel heavy and it doesn't feel burdensome, because we know that Jesus has already accomplished these things. And so obedience is not on us for our salvation. It's just an overflow. And so I think what stirs affection in me is that obedience can be a delight, and it doesn't feel like it has to be hard necessarily, because my righteousness and my acceptance before God actually doesn't depend on my obedience.
That's good.
Matthew 11:28.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like my thoughts have kind of been going like a million different directions with this question. But like one thing that comes to mind is in thinking of James, the end of James 1, where it's talking about being a doer of the word. And like if you're just a hearer and not a doer, that leads like to deception and like you're deceived in your hearts. But then goes on to say too that we have the word like implanted in our souls, and just that God is guiding us and directing us within that. And it's because of this like overflow of the grace that's already been done in our life. And that's just really awesome. And then like another thing too is just thinking of, yes, like we're talking about the foundation in which we're building through obedience by his grace, but then just in thinking of him as our foundation in general, that he is unwavering and unchanging and a God who is faithful, and that we can hold fast to him within that and build our foundation upon him, because he is not going to move.
Yeah. I think the thing, it's simple, that Jesus calls us to obedience, that there is a way of life that he calls us to, and that he desires to be near us in that obedience. And the thing that draws my affections in is this, that it's not our obedience that wins the favor. The favor is already there, and still he calls us in to obey. So that's what it is for me. Thank you all for your words. It's good. Hopefully this was helpful for our listener. Quick reminders, if you're listening to this before Wednesday evening, we are having our Thanksgiving Eve gathering. We'd love to have you join us for that. And then the final week of the Sermon on the Mount on Sunday. So wrapping it up. Thank you, everybody. Adios.